The Korean Mafia Boss laughed while his family humiliated me at their table. He didn't know his rival had already put everything in my name. Dark romance Mafia Boss love story. There were 40 people in that room. Korean Mafia bosses, billionaire businessmen, crime family patriarchs. Every powerful name in Seoul seated under one roof for the most important Shin family dinner of the decade. And Jae-won, the Korean Mafia boss whose name I had carried for 3 years, whose empire I had helped build from the inside, looked across that table at me, in front of all of them, and said, "Some of us are still deciding who belongs here permanently." Laughter. Real laughter. From 40 people who watched a woman be erased in public and decided it was entertainment. I put down my fork, I folded my napkin. I looked at him once, and I thought, you have no idea what is already built. Because while Jae-won Shin spent 3 years deciding whether I was worth acknowledging, while his family returned my gifts and omitted my name, and seated me at the far end of every table, the most feared Korean mafia rival in Seoul had spent 14 months quietly, deliberately, methodically constructing a billion-dollar empire and registering every single asset in my name. Not his name, mine. And that night, the night the Korean Mafia boss laughed while his family humiliated me, was the night I finally said the word that activated everything. My name is Seo Yuna. Before I tell you about the empire, I need you to understand the woman who existed before she recognized her own power. I grew up in Busan, middle-class family, honest work. My father ran a small shipping logistics company. Nothing glamorous, nothing connected, but 30 years of clean reputation built with careful hands. I studied business and was genuinely good at it. Not just competent, the kind of good that makes professors recommend you for rooms other students never hear about. That was how I entered Korean corporate finance at 24. And how at 26, I walked into a boardroom and sat across from Jae-won Shin. Everyone in Korean business circles knew the Shin name. Old money, deep connections. A family that operated across every legal line with enough power and enough lawyers that no line had ever held them. Jae-won was the second son. The boardroom face of a family that ran half the Korean underworld from behind polished conference tables. Magnetic, controlled, precise. The kind of man who makes you feel like the most important person in the room without raising his voice. I was there to present a financial restructuring proposal for one of his subsidiary companies. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he said, "That is the most intelligent analysis anyone has put in front of me this year. Where have you been?" I told him I had always been exactly where I was. He smiled and said, "Then I haven't been paying enough attention. I won't make that mistake again." I should have understood what that meant. The way a Korean mafia boss frames attention as strategy, not affection. Instead, I heard the compliment. 6 months later, I was in his penthouse. 6 months after that, I was attending the first Shin family dinner where nobody used my name. The Shin family had a precise method of making people feel small without raising a hand. It was structural, built into every seating arrangement, every introduction, every gift protocol and table placement at every event I attended for 3 years. In 3 years with Jae-won, I was never introduced as his partner at a family event. When introduced at all, I was someone Jae-won brought. His mother returned every gift I gave her. Not once, every time. A handwritten note accompanying each return. We don't accept things from people who haven't been properly welcomed. I asked Jae-won what that meant. What it would take, he said. Give it time. I gave it time. What I received in exchange was more dinners at the far end of tables I helped set, beside men who never learned my name, in rooms where my presence was tolerated but never acknowledged. The Korean Mafia boss whose empire I had helped legitimize, whose 2 subsidiaries I had restructured, whose 3 property acquisitions I had made legally sound, watched all of it happen in silence. Not once did he intervene. Not once did he say my name in a room where it needed to be said. I want to be precise about this, because there is a version of this story where the man was simply passive, caught between a partner and a powerful family, doing the best he could. That is not Jae-won Shin. Jae-won was a Korean Mafia boss who had neutralized rivals, restructured criminal empires, and ended careers before breakfast. He was not a man incapable of action. He was a man who looked at his family's treatment of me and made a deliberate choice. The choice was, let it continue. For 3 years, that was his answer. Every dinner, every returned gift, every omitted name, silence. And his silence was the loudest form of betrayal I have ever experienced. His father's 70th birthday was the largest event the Shin family had hosted in a decade. 3 floors of the main estate, 40 guests, every significant name in the Korean Mafia network, every connected businessman, every family ally with power worth placing in a room. Jae-won sent me a dress, he sent a car, he assigned me a seat. Far end of the table, as always, between 2 men who had never once addressed me directly. I arrived, I sat, I did everything correctly. The dinner moved through its courses. Conversation flowed around me, the way water moves around something it has already decided to avoid. Halfway through the meal, Shin Dae-ho, patriarch, empire builder, the most feared Korean mafia boss of the previous generation, stood to make his toast. He named his sons, he named his lieutenants. He acknowledged every woman at that table. 23 women, named individually, each one recognized, each one made visible. He sat down without saying mine. The room registered it immediately. I felt it. The collective exhale of people who had been waiting for exactly this confirmation. She is not counted. She has never been counted. And then Jae-won, reading his father's silence as permission, reading the room as an invitation. Raised his glass and said it out loud. Some of us are still deciding who belongs at this table permanently. He was looking directly at me. 40 people heard it. Several laughed. No one moved. I want you to understand what I felt in that moment. Not the humiliation, not the public nature of the betrayal, not even the specific cruelty of a man choosing performance over protection. What I felt was clarity. 3 years I waited for him to choose me. In 1 sentence, in front of 40 witnesses, he answered. I folded my napkin. I stood without drama. I excused myself to no one in particular, and I walked out of the Shin estate for the last time. In the car, I made 1 phone call. I need to tell you about Kang Hyun-soo. In Korean mafia circles, his name carried a specific weight, not the loud, performative power of a man who needs people to fear him, but the quiet structural authority of someone so embedded in the foundations of things that removing him would require dismantling half of what stood above him. He and Jae-won had been rivals for 4 years, not violently, strategically. The kind of rivalry that plays out in boardrooms and acquisition bids and financial moves, designed to erode position by a percentage point at a time. Jae-won spoke about him rarely. When he did, there was something underneath the words, not fear exactly, recognition. The specific acknowledgement of a man who knows he is looking at his equal. I met Kang Hyun-soo 14 months before the birthday dinner. A small gallery opening, contemporary Korean art, a building I had quietly helped finance through a personal investment. Jae-won knew nothing about. Hyun-soo stood in front of a large canvas, dark background, a single figure facing away, for a long time. I stopped beside him. I asked what he saw in it. He said, a woman who built something significant and didn't put her name on it. I see that pattern everywhere I look. Women who construct things and allow other people to take credit for the architecture. It is the most common form of theft nobody discusses. He turned and looked at me directly. Not the way men in those circles looked at women they wanted to use. The way someone looks at a person they have already decided deserves more than what they are currently getting. Over the following weeks, he showed me documents, financial structures, property portfolios, holding companies nested inside other corporations, an architecture of wealth and power built with extraordinary precision across 14 months. Every asset, every account, every deed registered to one name, mine. How? I asked. Every document required my authorization. You couldn't have done this without my signature. He nodded. Every document required your approval. I never signed on your behalf. I built the structure. I assembled every piece. And then I waited. Because the only version of this that was ever going to work was the one where you chose it yourself. I looked at him across the table. You built $1 billion empire and waited for a woman who hadn't decided yet, he said. I built it because I watched what they did to you. A woman who restructured two of the most complex subsidiaries in the Korean Mafia business network, being seated at the far end of a table between men who couldn't do her work in a decade of trying. I decided that if you ever chose to leave, when you chose to leave, you would not walk out with only what Jae-won Shin decided to give you. You would leave with an empire, one he would have to see from the outside for the rest of his life. I asked when he started building it, the night I heard about the first dinner where they forgot to say your name. He never touched me during those meetings. I want to be specific about that, because it mattered more than anything else. When I was most uncertain, when the weight of 3 years sat heaviest in the room between us, he never reached for my hand. He never closed the distance. He only placed the documents in front of me and waited, as if my choice mattered more than his victory, as if the point was never the empire. The point was that I walked into it on my own 2 feet, under my own authority, because I decided I was worth it. That was the moment I understood the difference between the two men. Jae-won had seen my value and spent 3 years extracting it without once acknowledging it existed. Hyun-soo had seen the same value and spent 14 months making sure the world would have to acknowledge it, whether Jae-won did or not. The difference between a man who sees your value and a man who uses it is everything. In the car leaving the Shin estate, I called Hyun-soo. He answered on the second ring. I said, "Say it again." "The way you said it the first time." He said, "It's ready. Every building, every account, every holding company, every asset, all of it, in your name." "Say the word, Yuna." I said the word. What followed was not dramatic in the way revenge is supposed to be. No confrontations, no scenes, no fire. There were transfers. There were filings in public record offices across Seoul, Busan, and Incheon. Documents that quietly, legally, permanently moved one of the most significant corporate portfolios in Korean business into the name of a woman Jae-won Shin had just told 40 people didn't belong at his table. I found an office. A building in Gangnam, glass and steel, 40 floors, the kind of building that announces itself before you reach the entrance. My name on the directory, my name on the door, my name on the deed. Hyun-soo came by on the 3rd day to walk through the final structures. We sat across a conference table covered in the last of the documents. He said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like I should have done this sooner." He said, "You did it exactly when you were ready. That's the only timing that ever matters." Jae-won Shin came to my office on a Thursday morning. 11 days after the birthday dinner. 11 days after I walked out. I knew he was coming. My assistant called ahead. "A Mr. Shin is in the lobby. He says he doesn't have an appointment." I said, "Send him up." I want to tell you what he saw when the elevator opened on my floor. He saw my name on the wall behind the reception desk. Large, clean, permanent. Not a nameplate. Not a temporary sign. Carved into the wall itself, he saw 2 men in the waiting area. Men he recognized. Men who had been at that birthday dinner. Who had laughed when he made his remark. Who now sat with folders in their laps waiting for a meeting with me. Men who looked up when Jae-won walked in and looked away again immediately. The specific discomfort of people who understand exactly what they are witnessing. He came into my office. I was at the head of the conference table, not at the far end, not in an assigned seat at the head. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer than I had ever seen him pause. Jae-won Shin, Korean Mafia Boss, a man who had walked into every room in Seoul with absolute authority, stood in my doorway and did not know where to put himself. He sat across from me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. When he finally did, his voice was stripped of everything I had spent 3 years listening to. The control, the precision, the performance of a man who always had a sentence ready. The Gangnam Tower, the Busan waterfront, the 3 holding companies, 6 years of work. "All registered to you," I said. "Yes, Hyun-soo built this. He built the structure. I authorized every document, my signature, my approval, my name." He built it for me, Jae-won, while you were deciding whether I deserved a place at your table. While your family returned my gifts and your father named 23 women in a room and sat down before he reached mine. Hyun-soo was building me a table of my own. As it turns out, it's considerably larger than yours. For the first time in 3 years, Jae-won Shin had no sentence prepared. No family name to stand behind, no room full of laughing men, no performance left. Just a man sitting across from a woman he had spent 3 years underestimating, in a building that bore her name, surrounded by men who now waited for her approval, understanding fully and finally exactly what his silence had cost him. He said, "How long did you know? About the Empire? 14 months. About what you were? Longer than that." He looked at the table. "Yuna, you had 3 years. 3 years of dinners where your family treated me like I wasn't in the room. 3 years of gifts returned with notes about whether I had been properly welcomed. 3 years where all you had to do was say my name once, in one room, with authority, and mean it. You never did. Someone else decided I was worth remembering. I think you already know which one of you made the right decision." He stood. He walked to the door. He stopped. And then, very quietly, without turning around, he said, "I knew you were exceptional the first day I met you." I said, "I know. That's what makes it worse." He left. Through the glass wall of my office, I watched him pass the 2 men in the waiting area, men who had once laughed in that dining room, who kept their eyes down as he walked to the elevator. The doors closed. I looked out at a city with my name in its foundations, in its walls, in its documents and deeds. Not his name, not the name of his family, not the name of anyone who had ever seated me at the far end of a table. Mine. They will tell you the most dangerous people in any room are the ones with the most power. They are wrong. The most dangerous people in any room are the ones everyone forgot to watch. The ones who sat quietly at the far end of the table, learned everything there was to learn, and left without a word. Invisible women don't disappear. They just stop announcing what they're building.